When the blood of the ancients, a fire is lit. Chaos is the rhythm, where shadows are fit. Through the veil of the dead, we crawl and we learn. The mysteries unfold, and the wheels turn. And spectral whispers, in the dark we find. No dogma to bind us, no limits in mind.
Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're going to get into something pretty unique.
Yeah, it's kind of a wild mix, honestly.
We're talking chaos heathenism.
A blend of Norse traditions,
Yeah.
chaos magic.
And even the left-hand path.
Yeah, lots to unpack there.
We've got a ton of sources for this one, academic papers,
Yeah,
personal accounts.
even some mythological deep dives.
I'm going to touch on some heavy topics, too. Religion, death, even the unconscious mind.
But hey, that's what makes it interesting.
Our goal is to give you a well-rounded view, really get what this whole system is about,
Exactly what it is, where it came from,
and how it might even apply to your own life, you know?
because that's what people really want to know.
So when we're talking about something like this, a real mix of traditions, where do we even start?
Well, like, understanding the origins can be super helpful. Chaos heathenism is pretty recent, actually.
Oh, really? I thought it'd been around for ages.
Nope, 21st century stuff, alongside globalization, the internet, late capitalism.
Wow, that's fascinating. So like a product of our times.
Totally. Adapting ancient wisdom for today's world. Our sources connect this to occultism, too.
Occultism. Like way back when.
Yeah, I think late 1800s, Blavatsky, Theosophy, Crowley,
Yeah.
Carroll.
Right. They were all about pushing those boundaries.
Exactly. Evolving those esoteric ideas. It's all connected. But in chaos heathenism, there's this huge emphasis on personal gnosis.
Gnosis. That
Yeah.
direct experiential knowledge, not just like blind faith.
Right. One source tells this story about Evelyn. She felt totally stifled by society, you know?
Felt like there was something more out there.
Exactly. She had this, it's described as, quote, intense noumena, like a powerful connection to something bigger.
I can relate to that. Feeling that pull towards something beyond the everyday.
Totally. And the sources say suppressing that instinct, it can lead people to alternative paths. Tantra, Buddhism,
Yeah.
even chaos heathenism.
Makes sense. It's about breaking free from those structures, finding your own way.
That's the heart of it. And this is where heathenism comes in, specifically Odin.
Wait, Odin, the Allfather, god of wisdom and war. How's Aichi fit into all this?
Well, our sources call him the archetypal chaos magician.
Huh. I never thought of him that way. Always seemed pretty straightforward.
Nope. He's constantly pushing boundaries, seeking knowledge, even if it's dangerous, not afraid of death, goes to the underworld for wisdom.
Wow, he's more of a rebel than I realized.
Right. Total rule breaker. It ties into the idea of the anarch in chaos heathenism.
Anarch. Sounds intense. Like politically.
No, not like that. More about crafting your own worldview, independent of any authority.
I like that. Taking ownership of your beliefs.
It even shows up in the Futhark runes, like a hidden message.
Oh, really? Tell me about that. I'm fascinated by runes.
So the name Futhark itself, it actually contains the phrase F-U-A-R-G-R.
Okay. I'm not seeing it.
F-U in Old Norse translates to, well, a pretty vulgar word, still around in German, and arger is another taboo term.
No way. You're kidding. Hidden right there in plain sight.
Yep. Shows that even these ancient systems had this humor, this rebellion.
Amazing. It's about that individual spirit, isn't it? Bringing that to your practice.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big element. Ancestor reverence.
Okay, ancestor reverence. That's always felt a bit mysterious to me. How do chaos heathens approach that?
It's less about worshiping distant figures and more about understanding our connection to those who came before us. They shaped who we are.
Right. We're all products of our past, in a way.
Exactly. It's a relationship. It deserves respect. And the sources give some cool techniques for connecting.
Oh, like what?
Tarot, runes, divination, actively engaging with that ancestral energy, seeking their guidance.
Interesting.
It goes back to personal gnosis. Don't just believe, experience it. The sources even talk about meditation, like Vipassana techniques.
Vipassana, that's Buddhist, isn't it?
Yep. Chaos heathenism is all about crossing the streams, taking inspiration from various traditions. We don't know if ancient heathens meditated like that, but hey, they were definitely tapping into altered states.
I can see that. It's about those universal principles, right?
Yeah.
Not just one specific culture.
Exactly. It's all connected. Which leads us to a big concept the sources talk about, the illusion of separateness.
Illusion of separateness. Okay, now you've got me intrigued. What's that all about?
It's this idea that we're somehow separate from each other, from nature, from the universe itself. The sources say it's harmful, reinforced by what they call technocratic thinking.
Ah, right, that hyper-individualistic, technology-driven worldview.
Exactly, those hierarchies that divide us, but chaos heathenism fights against that, embracing hybridity.
So like blending practices, rejecting pure or rigid traditions.
Right. It's about recognizing that complexity, that fluidity in ourselves and our practices.
I like that. It feels very honest somehow, acknowledging the messiness of it all.
Exactly. And this connects to another big theme, our relationship with death and mystery.
Okay, now death. That's getting pretty deep.
Think about it. When we deny death, when we fear the unknown, we're clinging to that separateness, trying to control things.
I see what you mean. It's like building walls against the very thing that connects us to something bigger.
Right. The sources even compare this to Christianity, how it's treated the unconscious mind.
Whoa, now that's an unexpected connection.
They argue that historically, some forms of Christianity have demonized personal experience, suppressed the unconscious.
Yeah, that makes sense. That fear of the shadow self, the unknown.
Exactly. They tie it to Jung's critiques, too, how Christianity imposed Christ's unconscious on everyone, rejecting individual experience.
Interesting. So it's about confronting those truths, those parts of ourselves we might not like.
Exactly. Chaos heathenism says, face death, face mystery, embrace the unknown. And that brings us to Veritas and Aletheia.
Okay, now we're getting philosophical. Veritas and Aletheia, those are.
Veritas is like fact-based truth, measurable, quantifiable. Aletheia is revealed truth from experience, intuition.
Ah, so the head and the heart, kind of.
Exactly. The sources say too much Veritas without Aletheia, it creates a limited view of reality.
Give me an example. I'm not quite picturing it.
Think about our environmental crisis. The sources say it's partly from focusing only on science, progress, material stuff. We lose that connection to nature.
Right. We forget the mystery, the inherent value of the natural world.
Exactly. And they connect this to that story of Odin and Vafthrudnir.
Oh, yeah, the wisdom contest. Didn't Odin outsmart the giant?
He did, but not with facts and figures. He asked a question rooted in personal experience, something Vafthrudnir couldn't know.
Wow, that's a great point. It's like true wisdom comes from integrating knowledge with experience, with that sense of wonder.
Exactly. And that brings us to another fascinating part of chaos heathenism, physical culture.
Physical culture. Now that's a twist. What's that got to do with anything?
The sources say it's about the mind-body connection. Physical strength and discipline, they're not separate from spiritual growth.
So a holistic approach then.
Totally. They talk about functional training as a key element in these ancient practices. Martial arts, bodyweight exercises, weapons training.
Wow. So like a real warrior spirit.
You got it. It's about developing the holy person. And this holistic view applies to their magic, too.
Oh, right. We were going to talk about the rituals and techniques.
Yeah, chaos heathen magic isn't about strict rules or formulas. It's creative, expressive, all about that emotional intensity.
So it's more about feeling it rather than just going through the motions.
Exactly. Find what works for you. The sources share some personal stories about their rituals, like one called the Odinic healing rite.
Odinic healing rite. Okay,
Yeah.
that's
It involves offerings, invocations, and connecting with Odin in a really transformative way, acknowledging both his light and dark aspects.
Wow. So like embracing that duality within ourselves.
Precisely. The source said the results were incredible. Healing, connection, things falling into place. But it's not all big dramatic rituals.
Oh, there are smaller ones too.
Yep. They mentioned something called the six-fold flame sequence. 6 rituals done 6 weeks apart for personal growth and healing.
6 rituals. That sounds like a real commitment.
It is. It highlights discipline and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. But it's not just about external practices. It's also about the internal, like trance.
Trance. Okay, now we're getting mystical. Is this where the chaos really comes in?
It's definitely a part of it. Accessing those hidden parts of yourself, the potential beyond everyday consciousness. They take inspiration from Milton Erickson, the hypnotherapist.
Erickson. He's a pioneer in understanding the power of the unconscious.
Exactly. And chaos heathens use these trance techniques to achieve things, overcome obstacles.
So like self-hypnosis almost.
In a way, yeah. One source talks about becoming Milton to handle tough situations.
Becoming Milton.
Yeah.
Literally.
Well, figuratively, tapping into his energy and expertise.
That's fascinating.
The sources say you can ask yourself, what would a chaos magician do in any situation?
I love that. It's about adopting that mindset, that resourcefulness. So we've talked personal gnosis, ancestors, rituals, trance. But what about the left-hand path? How does
Yeah.
that fit in?
Good question. And it's often misunderstood. The left-hand path, the LHP, it's not about being evil.
Right. I've heard that misconception before.
It's about individual sovereignty, self-discovery, challenging those norms.
Sounds very much in line with what we've been talking about already.
Exactly. The sources trace it back to Tantra, using practices that are, well, taboo. Sex, death, drugs, even madness.
Whoa. Okay, that's intense.
The point is, these things have power. By confronting them, we can break free from those limitations.
So it's not about indulging in them, but using them for growth.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Exploring those deeper mysteries, facing our shadow selves, and integrating those darker parts of ourselves.
It definitely sounds like a path that requires a lot of self-awareness.
Absolutely. And the sources connect it to Jung's shadow work, becoming whole, accepting all of ourselves, even the uncomfortable bits.
It's a powerful idea. Really makes you think about good and evil in a different way.
It does, and believe it or not, it brings us to laughter and play.
Wait, what? Laughter. I thought we were talking about the left-hand path.
I know, right? It seems counterintuitive. But the sources say it's about balance. Getting too serious, too rigid, it can actually hurt your spiritual growth.
So finding that lightness, that joy, even when exploring those dark parts of ourselves.
Exactly. They point to Thor, the laughing god. His power comes from that exuberance, acceptance of chaos.
I never thought of Thor that way. Always seemed more about, well, smashing things.
He does that too. But it's about that balance, not taking everything so seriously. The sources contrast this with the pursuit of power through domination.
Ah, so like finding that playful energy, dancing with chaos instead of trying to control it.
Exactly. It's vital for a healthy spiritual life.
Yeah.
But before we go too far, we need to talk about the practical side.
Right, those results-oriented magic techniques you mentioned earlier.
Chaos heathenism isn't just theory. It's about using magic to create real change in your life.
Okay, this is where I get skeptical. I'm all for exploring spirituality, but magic. I need to see it to believe it.
I get it, but the sources give some pretty compelling examples. Remember that story about the noisy upstairs neighbors and the wolf sigil?
Oh, yeah. That one definitely caught my attention. So you're saying these techniques can actually influence situations, even people?
That's what the sources suggest. It's not manipulation, though. More about shifting energy, creating conditions for positive change.
Interesting. So aligning your will with grade, right? To manifest the desired outcome.
Precisely. And they say it doesn't have to be complicated rituals. Sometimes simple things work best, like using the Raidher rune to, well, encourage those neighbors to move.
That one was pretty straightforward. Just a single rune charged with intention.
And it worked. But they also warn against getting too attached to the outcome. Trust the process. Let go of control.
That's the tricky part, isn't it? Surrendering to that word, as they call it.
Exactly. We're not in total control. There are forces at play we may not fully understand, and that's where the real power lies.
This is giving me a lot to think about. It's a very different way of looking at magic.
It is. It challenges our assumptions about what's possible.
So we've covered a lot. Origins, principles, practices, the left-hand path. But I have to admit, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Where do we go from here? How do we actually bring this into our lives?
Great question. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Hi everyone! Next week we will have 3 podcasts about very interesting books on chaos magic because although they are not specific lines, they are very useful to those who are willing to use them, both in concrete jungles and in nature. This is here at...
Chaos Magic Time.
So we've been covering a lot of ground, but those practical magic techniques, I'm still curious about those. Shifting energy, aligning with wired, it all sounds very, well, mystical.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. It's intriguing, but a part of me is like, does this stuff really work?
You know, it's funny you say that because the sources actually provide quite a few real-life examples, like specific instances of chaos heathen magic in action.
Oh, right. Like that story about the noisy neighbors and that wolf sigil, right?
Yeah, that was a pretty vivid example. Remember, they were dealing with these ridiculously loud upstairs neighbors, and nothing seemed to help.
Yeah, and they ended up, drawing a rune sigil to basically get them to move out?
Exactly. They created a sigil, a visual representation of their intention, and they incorporated the Reitho rune, which is all about journeys and change.
So they basically drew a symbol and just focused their energy on it. That's it.
Well, not just that. They also used visualization, chanting, even offerings to kind of amp up the power.
Okay, so a bit more to it than just doodling, but still, it sounds pretty simple.
Right. But the key is that combination of symbolic magic, focused intention, and a clear understanding of what they wanted. They had to be really specific about their desired outcome.
And the crazy thing is, it actually worked, right?
Yeah.
According to the source, the neighbors moved out a few weeks later.
Yep. Wild, isn't it? Of course, we can't say for sure if it was the sigil or just coincidence, but...
But that's the point of chaos magic, right? It's about experimenting, seeing what happens.
Exactly. It's not about scientific proof. It's about personal experience, trusting the process.
Right. So it's not about forcing things to happen, but more like setting an intention, working with the energy of the situation.
Exactly. It's like you're not making things happen. You're creating the conditions for change, working with those deeper currents of word.
Yeah, working with those forces, not against them.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be empowering, actually.
It is. It gives you a sense of agency, right? Instead of feeling helpless, you're actively participating in shaping your reality. But you might be wondering, where does the chaos part come in? It seems like there's a lot of intention and focus involved.
That's a good point. It almost seems like the opposite of chaos, all that intention and focus.
Right. But that's where it gets interesting. Chaos magic isn't about creating chaos in the external world.
So it's not about stirring up trouble or anything.
No, not at all. It's about embracing the inherent chaos that already exists within ourselves and in the universe.
So recognizing that we can't control everything, that there will always be unpredictable elements, and being okay with that.
Exactly. It's about navigating the chaos, not fighting against it. And that's where those trance techniques we talked about earlier come in.
Oh, right, like that idea of becoming Milton to handle a tricky situation.
Yeah, embodying a different persona, tapping into someone else's energy and expertise.
I love that. It's like a mental hack almost. A way to access different ways of thinking and being.
Exactly. And the sources say you don't even have to limit yourself to specific people. You can ask yourself, what would a chaos magician do in any situation?
I love that. It's about cultivating that resourceful, creative mindset.
Exactly. It's about breaking free from rigid thinking, becoming more adaptable. So are you starting to see how chaos isn't something to be feared, but something that can actually be used for positive change?
I am, actually. It's a very different perspective, but it's making more sense now. It's like learning to dance with the chaos.
Beautifully put. And that brings us back to the left-hand path, which is all about embracing those aspects of ourselves and the universe that are often considered taboo or even dangerous.
Okay, remind me again how that fits into all of this. The left-hand path, or LHP.
The LHP challenges those norms. It's about individual sovereignty and recognizing that the things we often shy away from can actually be tools for growth.
So confronting those shadow selves we talked about, those parts we might want to hide.
Precisely. And the LHP sometimes uses practices that society might consider taboo, like sex, death, drugs.
Right, you mentioned that before. It definitely sounds intense.
It can be, but the point isn't indulgence. It's about using these things consciously, intentionally, to push past those limitations and access deeper levels of awareness.
So like using them as a catalyst for growth, not just, messing around.
Exactly. But it's important to emphasize that this approach requires a lot of self-awareness, a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, I can see that. It's not a path for everyone, and it's not something to be taken lightly.
Right. The sources stress the importance of guidance and mentorship, whether from experienced practitioners or even the deities and spirits themselves.
So it's not about going it alone. You need support, especially when exploring those more challenging aspects of the path.
Exactly. And this brings us to another element that I think is often overlooked. The role of humor and playfulness.
Oh, right. We were talking about Thor as the laughing god.
Yeah,
It seems like a strange fit with all this talk of shadow selves and taboo practices.
I know, right? But the sources argue that getting too serious, too rigid in your beliefs can actually hinder your spiritual growth.
So finding that balance, that lightness of being, even when exploring the darker, heavier stuff.
Exactly. It's a reminder that spirituality can be joyful, even fun.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the seriousness of it all, especially in a world that often feels so heavy and intense.
I agree. And the sources actually suggest that cultivating that sense of humor and playfulness can even make your magic more effective.
Really? I'm curious, how does that work?
Well, when you're relaxed and playful, you're more open to inspiration, more willing to experiment, and less likely to get stuck in those rigid rules and expectations.
Right. Like sometimes when you're too focused on getting it right, you miss out on those spontaneous insights.
Exactly. And Thor is a great example of this. He's this powerful deity, but he also embodies that joyful, irreverent energy.
Yeah, he's not afraid to laugh, to get his hands dirty, to enjoy the messy side of life.
Right. It's a good reminder that spirituality doesn't have to be all solemn rituals and deep contemplation.
Absolutely. So before we move on, I'm curious about those specific rituals you mentioned, the Odenic healing rite and the sixfold flame sequence. What's their purpose? How do they work?
Right. Well, in chaos heathenism, rituals aren't about blindly following a script. It's about creating a sacred space to connect with the deities, your ancestors, and yourself.
So there's room for personal interpretation.
Absolutely. The sources emphasize that the most effective rituals are the ones that truly resonate with you.
So it's not about getting it right. It's about finding what feels authentic and meaningful.
You got it. And rituals can be used for so many things. Healing, divination, protection, manifestation, deepening your connection to the deities and the natural world.
Wow, so it's like having a whole toolkit of techniques to choose from depending on what you need.
Exactly. The sources provide a bunch of different examples, from simple candle magic to really elaborate ceremonies.
Can you give me an example, like a specific ritual and how it might be used?
Sure. There's the Mead of Poetry ritual, which is designed to invoke Odin and tap into inspiration and creativity.
Oh, that sounds interesting. How does it work?
It involves creating a special mead infused with herbs and spices that are associated with Odin, and then using it as an offering while reciting poetry, chanting, or doing something creative.
Ah, so it's about aligning yourself with Odin's energy, opening yourself up to that creative flow.
Exactly. The sources also describe a trance-guided journey exercise that's aimed at healing what they call inherited emotional patterns.
Inherited emotional patterns. That sounds pretty deep. What does that even mean?
It's the idea that we can inherit emotional tendencies from our ancestors, just like we inherit physical traits.
This is like we're carrying around emotional baggage from our family history.
In a way, yeah. And this exercise uses visualization and trance techniques to journey back through your lineage and release those patterns.
Wow, that sounds incredibly powerful, like breaking free from those unconscious influences.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our past can impact our present and that healing those ancestral wounds can create a better future.
This is really fascinating. I'm starting to see how all these elements, the runes, the deities, the rituals, the trance techniques all fit together. It's a really rich and complex path.
It is, and it's a path that emphasizes personal exploration. There's no one right way to practice chaos heathenism.
It's about finding what works for you, what helps you connect with the divine in your own way.
You got it. It's about taking those ancient traditions and making them relevant to our modern lives, forging our own path and embracing the inherent chaos and beauty of it all.
I love that. It's a really empowering perspective.
It is, and it brings me to one final point I'd like to make, which is the importance of community.
Community. I hadn't really thought about that. Is there a strong sense of community in chaos heathenism?
There can be. While the path emphasizes individual gnosis and personal exploration, the sources also acknowledge the value of connecting with like-minded people, sharing experiences, and supporting each other.
Ah, so it's not just about solitary practice. It's also about finding your people, those who get it.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd like to leave you with this thought. What if the real magic of chaos heathenism lies not just in the rituals and techniques, but in the connections we forge with ourselves, with our ancestors, with the deities, and with each other?
That's a really beautiful thought to leave us with. The magic is in those connections.
We are and live here to enjoy life. Avoiding these means avoiding being ourselves. One of the ways people like to live is by learning more And that's why I make these podcasts about books and about Chaos Magic. Here in Brazil, we are all educated to be cheap. That hard education to be socially accepted. So I thought that the popular objection to Chaos Magic would be very intense. I was wrong. Here, people are eager to learn and practice things that work for us Brazilians. It's not different outside of Brazil, but since English is not our native language, communication is a bit rigid. Anyway, I now make podcasts in English because just as many other people also liked them. I believe it is important to use these podcasts as a basis for at least Chaos Magic group to start discussions about them. However, I must point out that groups that are not practitioners of Chaos Magic will be very surprised when they practice these works that I recommended. And also I will recommend. Let's keep our hunger for learning strong here in Brazil or anywhere on the world. Hugs.
We've explored a lot in this deep dive, but I'm still wondering, how do we actually take all these ideas and practices and make them a part of our lives? It's kind of overwhelming.
It is a lot, I get that. But remember, chaos heathenism isn't about mastering every single technique, you know? It's more about finding what speaks to you, what feels true and meaningful. It's a journey.
Right. Not a destination, like you said before. So it's less about rules, more about personal expression.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about it. It encourages you to ask questions, challenge things, find your own way within the tradition. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
I like that. It takes the pressure off. You know, we don't have to be perfect right out of the gate.
Exactly. And don't forget about the humor, the playfulness we talked about. Don't be afraid to experiment, to mess up, to learn as you go.
So where do we even start? Like practical steps to bring this into our lives. What would you suggest?
Well, the sources offer a few things, like diving into that reading list, trying those exercises, for ancestor work, trance, reflecting on the stories we shared.
Okay, so deepen our understanding. Try it out for ourselves. See what clicks.
Exactly. Out of everything we talked about, what really stood out to you? What got you curious?
I was really intrigued by those trance techniques, especially becoming Milton, to get through a tough situation.
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful one, isn't it?
It is. Like tapping into someone else's energy, their expertise. I can see how helpful that could be.
Absolutely. I was really drawn to those rituals, the Odinic healing rite and the six-fold flame sequence. They sounded so intense, but also incredibly transformative.
I was too.
Yeah.
But I was also kind of intimidated,
Yeah.
Like, do I have to get it exactly right?
Not at all. Remember, the sources say to use them as inspiration. Make them your own. Find what feels authentic to you.
Right. That's a relief. So it's more about the energy you bring, the intention, than about, following a script.
Right. Creating that sacred space, connecting with the deities, your ancestors, your own inner self.
It's about finding those practices that help us tap into that numine, right?
Yeah.
That connection to the sacred.
Exactly. And don't forget, it's all a journey. Don't get discouraged if things don't happen overnight or if you hit some bumps along the way.
So what's the next step? If someone's just starting out on this path, what would you tell them?
Start with what speaks to you, what excites you. The runes, the deities, the rituals. Figure out what calls to you, and then dive deeper. Read, practice, experiment, and see where it leads.
It's like finding those threads that resonate and following them, seeing where they unravel.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to connect with other people on the path. There are forums online, groups, even local kindreds, places to share experiences, learn from each other.
Right, that sense of community is so important, like we were talking about earlier. It's all about those connections.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to leave everyone with this thought. What if the true power of chaos heathenism isn't about controlling the chaos, but learning to dance with it? Embracing the uncertainty, the change, seeing it all as an opportunity for growth and transformation.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a reminder that it's all about the journey, with all its ups and downs, and finding the joy in that. Thanks for taking us on this incredible ride. It's been amazing.
The pleasure was all mine. Keep exploring, everyone.